Hello, Duke fans. Episode 56 of DBR Bites, the Duke Basketball Roundup. I'm Jason Evans, here for your listening enjoyment. I'm joined by my partner in crime, Donald Wine. It is Tuesday evening around 8:30 or so, and we're going to be talking about some things that, by the time you hear this, may be a little bit dated, because we're going to talk about Jayson Tatum and what happened to him in Team USA's first basketball game. And by the time you listen to this, it's possible they will have played game 2. And it's possible our comments will be moot. But just in case they aren't, we're going to talk about it anyway. Donald, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Catch me in front of my TVs, multiple. I actually only have one TV. My multiple screens for the Olympics for the next 10, 11 days. I had multi-view on my TV. I had multi-view on my iPad. I had multi-view on my computer while I was doing work. Lot of cool stuff, Jason, already in these Olympics.
Yeah. So I got to ask, did you watch the U.S. men in the gymnastics last night?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, so first of all, I watched, it was yesterday afternoon. I was flying back from Louisville. And so I was in a restaurant trying to get some food before I jumped on my plane when the guy I'm calling Rivers Pommel, because he looks like Rivers Cuomo from Weezer, the pommel horse specialist comes in and absolutely just does what he came to do, right?
Yeah, his name is Steven Nedorosik. I think I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes, I didn't want to mispronounce his name, but Rivers Pommel sounds great to me.
I mean, dude, they're literally showing this guy the entire competition. They're like, he's just waiting. He's in the pommel horse. He's the specialist in the pommel horse. That's all he does. He's just waiting. And I was like,
and just sleep, basically all but sleeping, right? Like,
yeah,
in a trance.
I'm thinking to myself, first of all, unbelievable pressure. Like, everyone else is there to compete in like 3, 4, maybe even 5 apparatus. You're doing 1. You're like, I'm here for one of these things, guys. And by the way, my one thing, we're on the razor's edge of whether or not we're going to get a medal. And I'm the last performer. I've watched you guys do everything for like 3 or 4 hours. And then to come out there and just rock it. Donald, so he did a move. They pointed this out at one point where he puts his hand down on the pommel or on the bars or whatever, and he spins a full 360 without moving his hand. I tried this at my office today, Donald. It's not possible. He did it twice. I'm like, how did that happen?
Jason, you know the rules. Do not try this at home. We are not Olympians. Maybe in podcasting we'll be Olympians one day. If the podcast makes the Olympics, exactly, I hope we're still doing this and we can get that done. Jason, I'll also note that we're not going to get into all the Olympics, but the other thing I did want to point out to you, not dealing with basketball or any sport that we normally cover on the show. Did you see the ending of the women's rugby bronze medal game? Yeah.
So wait, I have to preface this by saying my son, who never played rugby before college, went to college. He's a good natural athlete. He played soccer, he played basketball in high school, played some baseball, but never had any one sport. Got to college, he wasn't good enough to play any of those sports. So he picked up club rugby, and he turned out to be a great rugby player because he was really fast and he could just like run around people left and right. He was actually in his club rugby league. Now this was D3, smaller colleges, but in his club rugby league, he was the league MVP as a junior and the leading scorer in the entire league. And so I went and watched a lot of his rugby matches. It was a lot of fun. So I actually know a little bit about how rugby is played. The ending of the women's bronze medal match, I've never seen anything like that.
It was incredible. I watch a lot of rugby. I watch a ton of rugby. You know me, I watch a lot of sports, and everyone's like, oh, you watch every sport. No, I literally watch a lot of rugby, because especially during the Rugby World Cup, which was just last year, I was up at like 3 a.m. for some of these games. This was absolutely incredible because it was literally the final play of the
time
game.
Had run out. Like the moment they go down again, done, over. And she suddenly trucks two players.
Trucked 2 people to do it and ran 90 meters to get to the end.
Like incredible.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. And also at the same time, like, of course, again, I had multi-screens on. So at the same time, like the women's gymnastics, who just blew away the competition, they were in the middle of something and they like land some difficult move. And then at the same time, like U.S. soccer, men's soccer, who qualified, they score goals. So it's like literally the same. I'm literally running around, and if someone asked me what I was yelling at, I would have just said, yes, everything happened at once, but that was the highlight, at least of today for me.
All right, so look, I didn't think we were necessarily going to lead with this, but because of our preamble there,
yeah.
Let's start with the Team USA men's basketball, and I don't want to get into how the team did great in the first game. They beat Serbia. Serbia is considered one of the other medal contenders. This was considered the toughest team that they were going to face in their group. They trounced them. I didn't call up the final score. I apologize, but it wasn't even.
It was around 30. 28.
Yeah, it was like a 26 point game. Wasn't even really competitive game, despite Serbia having the best player on the floor in Nikola Jokic. Team USA just destroyed them. Congrats to Kevin Durant, who hadn't played in like 2 or 3 months, basically walked out of the doctor's office and went like 8 for 8 from the field or something absurd like that. I think I read that Kevin Durant is the leading Olympic scorer in U.S. history or something like that.
Yeah, or at least on the men's side, he passed
right.
Carmelo Anthony during that game.
Yeah. And showed why. And LeBron was great, and I totally get it. But we're going to talk about the fact that Steve Kerr, the head coach of Team USA, chose to not play Jayson Tatum a single second in this game. Now, I want to preface by saying Tatum is really seen across the NBA and on this team as a power forward. Certainly as a bigger forward, even if he plays a little on the wing, he's a bigger forward, and he frankly plays the same position as LeBron James and Kevin Durant. And arguably LeBron James and Kevin Durant were the 2 best players in that game. So you can kind of be like, oh, it's just gonna be tough to find minutes for Tatum, even though 4 years or 3 years ago, I guess, at the Tokyo Olympics in 2021, Tatum was the second leading scorer on that team behind Kevin Durant, and a starter, and played a huge role for Team USA. But I'm not going to go off on Kerr yet. I'll let you go first, Donald. What is your thought? And by the way, it's worth noting, it wasn't just Tatum. Tyrese Halliburton, a second-team All-NBA player, a guy who led his team to the NBA Eastern Conference Finals, one of the final 4 teams in the NBA. The best player on one of the final 4 teams, the best player on the championship team. Neither one of them played a single second in the first game. Donald, just give me your thoughts on what Steve Kerr's doing so far as head coach.
I mean, I didn't like it. I obviously think, especially Jayson Tatum, right? Like, he's one of the best players in the NBA. He has proved that. He just won a title, and arguably
First
was
team
the
All-NBA
MVP
3 years in a row. First
right.
team All-NBA 3 years in a row. I think it's him, Luka Doncic, and Nikola Jokic are the only guys who've been first team All-NBA for the past 3 years in a row. Right. I believe.
And what that means is he's one of the top 5 players in the world. That's what that means. And the fact that he didn't get a second is kind of mind-boggling. I kind of understand the explanation of it. And I almost wonder if in the midst of Kevin Durant coming back, on the court, he did play like, a couple of minutes in one of the exhibition games just to kind of get his legs under him. So this wasn't his first time hitting the court, but it was made clear to Jayson Tatum, like, hey, Kevin Durant's going to play in this game, and that is going to affect your playing time. I don't think, one, that anybody thought that Kevin Durant was going to go as unconscious as he did, right? He was 8 for 8 in the first half. I believe he finished 9 for 10 or something like that from the floor. The man could not miss, and he was hitting everything. And again, the second player on the team that was doing well was LeBron James. And I don't know that I see Jayson Tatum as a power forward. I think there's ways to play him or LeBron James, him, LeBron James, or him and Kevin Durant on the floor at the same time. We've seen him and Kevin Durant play on the floor during the Olympics 3 years ago. So that is something that can happen. I just feel like Steve Kerr might have missed like the fact that he probably thought in his head, like, hey, let's get through this game and then we'll assess things. And then he looked around, he looked down the end of the bench, he saw 2 guys that had not taken off the warmups. So it happens, right? There's guys on these teams, they're all the best of the best, that are going to have DMPs, coach's decision, whatever you want to call them. But this is something that clearly became a thing to the point where I'm not expecting it tomorrow against South Sudan, right? Jayson Tatum, if he doesn't get he's going to play tomorrow against South Sudan, because Steve Kerr has basically said, yo, you're going to see him tomorrow. And that's going to happen. I think it was a big deal, but I don't think in the grand scheme of the entire tournament that it's a big deal, because I think whatever happened. And Kerr recognizes that it was a mistake. He even said he felt like an idiot for not playing him. But I do think that is something where he will adjust going on, especially with these games if they start getting blowouts, right? Like I know we're playing South Sudan, who we only beat by 1, but if it's a different situation against South Sudan, you're going to see them empty the bench a little bit earlier, rest these guys because these games are going to come fast and quick, and you don't want to risk injury to any of these guys, especially with a short roster and with no ability to call it anybody else.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I didn't really buy Steve Kerr's explanation that, oh, I felt like an idiot for not playing them because, well, actually, I mean, it's interesting. As good as Halliburton is, all the conversation has been around the fact that he didn't play Tatum because Tatum was first team All NBA, and because Tatum just won the NBA title.
And you say at least on this team, like Halliburton can be considered behind certain teams. It's hard to fathom Jayson Tatum being behind 10 guys in terms of playing minutes.
Yeah, exactly. I actually think so. First of all, let me say this. When you have a guy like Jayson Tatum, who I forget his exact salary, but it's something stratospheric, and I believe he's either just signed or he's about to sign.
He just signed the largest contract ever
in NBA history.
$314 million.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the exact number, but it's an absurd number. He just played as long as anyone in the league can play. By the way, he was the Celtics' leading minutes guy during the regular season and the playoffs. I haven't looked and checked. Is very close. I believe that Jayson Tatum, between the playoffs and the regular season, played close to as many minutes as anyone in the entire NBA. He just did all that. He's a guy who makes tremendous amounts of money. And he said, I'm willing to get, I have a short off season, shorter than any, other than guys on Dallas and guys on Boston. No one else has as short an off season as those guys do. And Jayson Tatum, as the star of Boston, has extra demands on his time, extra, stuff that they need him to do. And for him to say, you know what? I'm making $50 million or something crazy like that. I've got a really short off season, but I'm still going to give you time, Team USA, in practice, in exhibitions, and then to play in the Olympics. He's essentially taking up 6 weeks, probably 2 months of his summer. He only gets like a 3 or 4 month break. He's taken up 2 months of that to play basketball for Team USA. And you don't play him. That's outrageous. That's ridiculous. Steve Kerr can't just say, oh, I'm an idiot and I forgot to. That's unforgivable. And it needs to change. And it shouldn't change just like, oh, it's a blowout. I'll give you 4 minutes at the end here. Steve Kerr needs to find a way to integrate all 12 of his superstars into his lineups. Yeah, it's a little bit challenging, but you know what? You've got Jayson Tatum and Tyrese Halliburton at the end of your bench. If you're a coach, figure that out. That is your job, is to figure out rotation so that none of these guys feel slighted, so that no one in the future, when you approach them about playing for Team USA, says, oh, you know what? I'm a little worried that maybe I'll be overlooked, that maybe I'll be overshadowed. And so suddenly Team USA doesn't have as good a team as they should have. Because if Jayson Tatum is getting embarrassed, and frankly, it's a little bit embarrassing. If Jayson Tatum's getting embarrassed by sitting on the bench in a 20-plus point blowout and not playing a single minute, don't you worry about, I don't know, the 5th, 7th, 10th best American who you would really like to have on that team? Maybe saying, Tatum and Halliburton, who are probably 2 of the 5 best at last season, 2 of the 5 best Americans in the league, and they didn't play. And I have to wonder a little tiny bit if Steve Kerr is playing favorites. There's an argument for having a college coach maybe be involved in this, or having a permanent Team USA coach. Steve Kerr, as you will recall, had Kevin Durant on his team in Golden State in his absolute best years as Golden State coach. He's had Steph Curry for many, 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 many years. And those guys are great players, no question about it. But Kevin Durant probably took some of Jayson Tatum's minutes. Steph Curry took some of Tyrese Halliburton's minutes. And you have to wonder a little bit if Steve Kerr's playing favorites with players that he knows as opposed to guys he doesn't.
I'm not going to go that far in yet because
I'm going there, baby.
You know why? Because we're talking about one game. Or also, I think the surprising part about Jayson Tatum not playing is he played so much in the exhibition games leading up to it. Yes, there was no Kevin Durant.
He was starting in the exhibition games. That's
correct.
Crazy.
So again, this is where I'm like, hey, this is not necessarily cause to, call in an inquisition and bring him into Congress and grill him on why, on his things. Because again, it hasn't exhibited a pattern yet. Now, if he plays like 2 minutes against South Sudan and we blow him out by 40, okay, you're going to have to answer more of those questions, Mr. Kerr. But I don't think that this is something to be a cause for concern right now, because as you just said at the top of the show, by the time you listen to these words, Jayson Tatum could have 27 points, 8 assists, 3 blocks, and 7 dunks, and
this will all be
single-handedly
yes.
taught Kevin Malawach how to play defense. Like, we could have all that happening as you listen to this right now. So hopefully that is the case, and we don't have to really broach the subject again. But I do think the balancing of all of these guys and how much they play off and on is the biggest part of this, and also figuring out how to win in the process. So it's a difficult task, but as you mentioned, Steve Kerr signed up to do it. So let's see if he can do it better the next game.
And I've got a solution to that problem. I think that Team USA, Grant Hill, if you're out there listening, buddy, Grant, I got an idea for you. I think Team USA should be the 8 best guys you can get, and then 4 role players. Because
that's what Derek White
role
is.
Players,
and I think the thing about it is Derek White should have been that role player.
Yeah,
and he played more minutes than his teammate.
Yeah, exactly. You get 8 superstars, and then you get 4 other guys who, for whatever reason it may be, you go, this would have been an opportunity to take someone like a JJ Redick onto a team who you would go, JJ Redick, he's not one of the 15 best Americans in the league. No, but he's one of the best shooters in the league. And so you would take someone like that. And you take someone like, Drew Holiday's on this team, but someone like a Drew Holiday who you go, that guy is a lockdown elite defender. We're putting him out there as a defender. You take someone else who you go, that guy's just a stud shot blocker. In the future, maybe Derek Lively is someone like that. And you say, we're going to take 4 guys who are going to be sort of matchup dependent. Maybe maybe they'll play. Maybe they play every game. But maybe some games they don't, 1 or 2 of them don't play as much. And it's not as insulting to them because it's clear they are there as a role player. And you're not looking for the 12 best players. You're not looking for 12 all-star, all-NBA players. You're getting like 8 guys like that, and then 4 guys to fill various roles. I think that would be a way better situation for Team USA.
You just described the entire tenure of Coach K as U.S. men's basketball head coach, because that's exactly what he did. He brought the Tayshaun Princes of the world. He brought Carlos Boozer. He brought those guys in because not just because they were the great players. They may not have been the best, like you said, best 12 players in America, but they made the best team that America could produce. And at the end of the day, we're talking about winning gold medals. It's what they do on the women's side. You get the best players that you can form the best team. And they may not be the 12 best players that you got, but it's going to be the best team that you can put together, because we are at a disadvantage against every other team in the world in that they get together for like 2 weeks and then they go play. Everyone else has been playing since, together since they were kids. And so, even Kevin Durant was talking about how they have to build that camaraderie immediately, even if they know each other. It's a little bit different to do it on the basketball court as opposed to, all-star games and such, where you're not really playing the defense.
Absolutely. All right. By the way, this just in. Coach K, really good at forming a team.
Seen it.
Shocking. Breaking news from the DBR podcast. Let's move on to our next topic. Scholarship limits and the settlement that the NCAA has just entered into with a huge class action involving former players. This is a big deal story, Donald. I know you've done some digging into this. The specifics we're going to get into here is the notion that the NCAA has expanded the number of scholarships that schools are allowed to offer. And Donald, talk to us about the fact that this is the end of the walk-on.
Yeah, and I'll preface this by saying that this settlement has been filed. It has not been accepted yet. So this is like a proposal, essentially, of, hey, here's how we propose we end this lawsuit and do the payouts that are normal. This is in addition to the $2.7 billion that would be part of the settlement. This is just a way of figuring out how to distribute some of that money. And I think the catch here is what we're going to talk about is the number of scholarships going up in just about every single sport that college offers. Some of them substantially. Men's football, they can, used to be 85. 85 is a lot of scholarship, but you still had like 15 or 20 guys that were considered walk-ons and preferred walk-ons and such. That number has gone up to 105. So this would be starting in the 2025-26 season. They could have 105 scholarship athletes if they want to. Men's basketball, we've talked about that magic number of 13. It's now up to 15. It matches that of women's basketball. But it's not just those two sports, it's every single sport. Cheerleading is dividing into two main categories, tumbling and stunt. They are gaining a combined 92 scholarships. Women's rowing up 48 scholarships. Women's equestrian up 45 scholarships. Huge increases in men's and women's lacrosse, men's baseball, fencing, track. All of these all of these sports, these disciplines are getting numbers to kind of match out what team rosters look like so that you could theoretically end having walk-ons. I preface all that by saying, yes, this is a proposal. Yes, it hasn't been official yet. And yes, this won't take effect for another year. But Jayson, it doesn't necessarily mean the end of the walk-on. It means the end of the walk-on as we know it. Because yes, basketball can have 15 scholarships, but as you and I have opined on this show, when we were going through all of the transfer portal things that we were going through in the offseason, we don't have to use all those scholarships. We don't have to fill all those slots. And also, it requires a lot of teams to have to come up with extra cash to fund those extra scholarships. Cash that some of these schools, yeah, the money's not in the bank yet, so they can't claim it. And I think that's the real thing here is, yes, it's great that they're going to get scholarship increases. It'll help some of these bigger schools that are like, hey, I think the one thing that will go away are those stories of the heart-wrenching stories of the guys who, work 3 jobs to afford to pay the tuition to play football, and then they give them a scholarship their final year, and it's a big thing on social media. Those won't happen anymore, right? But there's also not going to be guys who are saying, hey, I could choose to go to Duke, who's going to give me a scholarship, versus Kentucky, who's not giving me a scholarship, but they're going to give me some NIL money. NIL money is going to be the overarching theme here because everyone's going to have scholarships to divvy out, and everyone's going to know who has what scholarships based on who's coming back and who's entering the transfer portal. So I think I'll stop there, Jayson, but I do think that this is a good thing, first of all, to increase the number of scholarships, especially in some of these sports where they've been artificially low for so long, like baseball, softball, band. Like there's some that have 50, 60 people on the team and only like 3 or 4 can get scholarships. Track's one of those. So I really like that, but I wouldn't say necessarily it's the end of the walk-on, but it should be if the money gets pulled into the system so that everyone can get the scholarships that they deserve.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that the delightful sob stories that turn into wonderful triumphs of walk-ons are really they're a treasured part of college sports lore, and it's a pity that we're going to sort of lose an aspect of those. I mean, perhaps one of the most famous college sports stories of all time is the story of Rudy and Notre Dame, and his story essentially goes away with something like this. But the other aspect of this that I thought was fascinating is you got into it a little bit, the other side of the settlement, the money side of the settlement, where they for the first time, at least for me, I really saw a breakdown of what they're trying to do with the money in this, and that they said, they say that power conference schools, anyone who wants to, but all the power conference schools are probably going to do about $21 to $22 million a year that they're going to give to players across every sport. And I'd always sort of wondered, okay, how do you come up with that figure? What does that number mean? It was broken down in this report of this settlement that if you add that 21, 22 million or so, plus the cost of all the scholarships that schools are funding, plus room and board that goes with scholarships and other benefits like that, it comes to about 50% of the revenues of what a power conference team does, primarily from men's basketball and football, maybe a little bit from women's basketball, but 50% of athletic revenues is about what these benefits to the players will be, including cash payments of $21 to $22 million. And that 50% figure is exactly what, or almost exactly what the NBA, what the NFL, what salary capped leagues use as a percentage of revenues to compensate the players. So suddenly you're like, well, wait a second. This college is doing the same kind of thing they're doing in the NBA, same kind of thing they're doing in the NFL. It makes perfect sense. And I just really like the fact that I'm finally starting to really understand where they're coming up with these figures. And it's worth noting, by the way, and we don't have to get into a long thing about it. Goodness knows. You say the 3 letters NIL and you and I start talking for a half hour.
Right,
I,
right.
I want to apologize in advance. We are not going to do that here, but I do want to note that as part of this settlement, this proposed settlement, the NCAA has said that they really hope that this is going to tamp down on and perhaps almost end the era of NIL collectives that do pay for play. They are really hoping to make the NIL opportunities more and more legit. And I would frankly love it if a little tiny piece of this $3 billion settlement goes toward the NCAA being able to police and look at NIL deals and make sure that it is legit. Because if we're talking 50% of revenues, then the athletes are being compensated fairly. They're being compensated the same, as I said, as NBA and NFL players are. So if they're being compensated fairly, then going under the table with a pay-for-play deal should be something we can begin to get rid of. Guys can still make money off of regular endorsement deals. If you want to pay someone, $5,000 or $10,000 to deliver a speech or work at a camp, I think that's perfectly fine. If you want to pay someone to do an appearance that is a legitimate appearance at a legitimate market kind of rate, that's perfectly fine. But just handing them 500, a million, 1.5, $2 million to play for your school, that kind of thing, I think in this new world should go away, and I hope it does.
Basically, you want contracts with details in it. You want to see some as my parents used to say, you want to see some pluck for your buck, right? You want to make sure that everything is above board. And again, like you mentioned in the NBA, one of the biggest scandals in NBA history was the Joe Smith contract deal, which was they said, oh, the salary cap is $1 million. We're paying him $1 million. And under the table, they paid him tried to pay him $93 million and got caught. And so they had to lose draft picks for the better part of a decade because of that. But I think the other thing, Jason, that could be concerning, and again, we don't know how this is going to shake out. What could be concerning, and you and I have talked about this in the past as well, is that those mid-major and low-major schools
they're in such
might be in trouble when it comes to the financials of adding a number of scholarships of which they weren't able to afford the ones that they already had in the first place. And so what that could mean, and even some of these, Power 5 schools who are trying to keep up with the arms race that is, NIL, like Beetlejuice. If you think about what we already went through, Stanford a few years ago had to cut a bunch of programs, bunch of sports just to keep up with the Joneses. Maryland famously did that. We've seen schools close completely. And what was it? There's the team in Alabama who their school
the baseball team.
The baseball team closed it. And
they were shutting down the program, and then they almost won the national title.
No, they were shutting down the school. The school,
right? That's right. Yeah,
the baseball team outlasted the entire school. Right. So you have, in theory, you could see more of those situations where programs are being told, hey, if you can't come up with X million dollars, we can't sustain your program. And it's because of the cost of those three letters going up across the board for everyone. As I mentioned, it's not just football. It's not just basketball. Some of these schools are picking and choosing some of the athletes that they want to keep happy. Some of them have been in gymnastics, right? Livy Dunn is the second highest paid athlete in college. You have that softball player who just transferred and got $1 million NIL deal to transfer to Texas. I want to say it's Texas. So you have these stories of non-revenue sports, air quotes, that are getting the same money as some guys who are playing in college. But again, once you see all these salaries on the table, people are going to say, well, I do more than that person. I do more than that person. And that's where the NCAA should have come in a long time ago and policed it. I hope now that the settlement's in place, as you mentioned, they can take the time to evaluate how best to do this so that it does not become an arms race with no end, as we mentioned a couple shows ago.
Yeah, last word. And God, I hate we're going so long on this. 20 years ago, in 2004, there were 326 teams in Division I basketball. This past season in 2024, there were 362. So that's about 35 extra teams that we've gotten in the past 20 years. I think one of the offshoots, one of the effects of all of this, just to relate to what you were just saying about smaller schools, I think you're going to see Division I college basketball, Division I
contract a little bit,
start to shrink a little bit. We're going to get down from the 360s back into the 350s or 340s, maybe even less. Because it's just going to be hard for schools to compete, and it's going to be hard for schools just to afford to pay to even have a team under these new rules. All right, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, the DBR podcast talks about the Brotherhood podcast and our favorite topic of summer, Cooper Flagg. That story in just a moment.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Donald, we are back from the break, and we're going to quickly discuss the latest edition of the of the Brotherhood podcast. When I have the word podcast in my head, I naturally put DBR
You are manifesting Cooper Flagg one day appearing on this show, and I, for one, love you for that. Please,
thank you so much. Yes, I would love to make it happen. I'm not optimistic, but we will see. Duke is very, very cautious about allowing players to appear on outside podcasts, but they allow them all to appear on the Brotherhood podcast with CFOS. Caleb Foster had Cooper Flagg as his guest. This podcast just dropped today. Lots of good stuff in there. We will start with the most important thing, which is that CFOS asked him about both his favorite pro team and his favorite protein. This has become a thing now.
Yep.
It's Cooper Flagg told us that his favorite pro team is the Celtics and his favorite protein is chicken. With that, Donald, I've got a whole ton of notes on this, but I'll go to you first. What are some of the takeaways you have from what Cooper had to say about how his summer at Duke is shaping up?
I think it's been, it was very nice to see him talk about not just the experience at Duke, but also his experience with the USA Select team. They talked for quite a bit about how that's been going, or how it went, and how he kind of approached where he kind of said he felt a little nervous when he first looked over and he said, "Oh, snap, I'm guarding LeBron." And then he had to snap out of it because he was guarding LeBron. So I think the one thing that he mentioned,
by the way, really quick, but I love the fact he was like, oh my God, I'm guarding LeBron. But then he pointed out, he was like, but you start playing and you forget you're playing basketball.
Yeah. And I think, again, that ties into one of the things that they, I guess they had some fan questions, and someone said, what's the one thing that has gotten you to this point? And he said mentality. And that's the one thing that we've heard about him, that he has this never say die, this never quit, this hate to lose type of mentality. And that feeds how he plays and feeds everyone around him. It's kind of his charisma kind of exudes into everyone, and they all get this never say die, grit, never going to quit attitude. And I like that. And I think that, again, made him be so successful at the USA Select, at the USA basketball camp, because like you said, he kind of got wide-eyed for a second. Then he said, I'm here to do a job. I'm not here to lose. So let's go ahead and try and win. And, as we mentioned, he did all he could to get them within 1 point of beating the USA basketball team. But I also think, Jason, there's a couple of things that I want to point out, and there's a couple I know that you wanted to point out. He mentioned they CFOS, who I think has been easing very well into his role as the new host of the podcast. He asked who the best defender was in the team besides Cooper Flagg, and he said Malik Brown, which is a thing that I have heard all summer long. Everyone has been saying Malik Brown is the best guy. Talked about how he, you can't really pass on him because he will poke the ball away and steal it. The other things I think are interesting is, and me, I'm a jersey fanatic. He mentioned why he wore number 32 in high school and on the main teams, and then why he wears number 2 now. Obviously, he can't wear 32 at Duke because it's retired, and I think they've done away with the retired, guys having retired numbers now that all of them are back up in the rafters. But he wore number 32 in high school to honor Donovan Clingan's mom. Obviously, Donovan Clingan, who went and played, was 2-time national champion at UConn. Donovan Clingan's mom played with Cooper Flagg's mom, and Donovan Clingan's mom passed away a few years back, and so he wore number 32 to honor her. And I thought that was pretty cool to have that kind of link with a player who, again, was really, really good in college. And I also said number 2 is a similar vein. He selected number 2 to wear at Duke to honor a friend of his brother's who recently passed away from cancer. So, and I think that number was that guy's number, Donovan Kirk. So I think he's very thoughtful in a lot of things, and that we have not been able to experience that yet because there hasn't been a lot of interviews where you can kind of get deep. What I loved about this episode is that we were able to get deep on some of these questions and get some things out of him like this, where we understand, hey, this is why some of these guys select numbers, and sometimes it's to honor somebody else. And when you see him play with fire and with energy during the season, you know that there's a little bit behind that, and you know that he wants to represent that number and that person as well as he possibly can. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me get into a couple other things that were in there. By the way, it goes without saying, for those of you out there listening to us, you should also listen to the Brotherhood podcast.
It's great stuff.
I wanted to mention a couple things that stuck out to me. The first one was, you mentioned he talked about Malik Brown and Malik's ability to get deflection and Malik's versatility, making him the best defensive player on the team. He was asked about the guy who's impressed him the most, and he gave the same answer we have heard time and time and time again. If you ask a current Duke player who is impressing you the most, who is the most surprising guy in practice, they all have the same answer, and that answer is Kon Knueppel. Cooper said that Kon is not what he expected. He's talked about how consistent he is, and by consistent, I think he was talking about knocking down jumpers. So one of the things we've seen at Duke, Donald, in the past has been guys who are up and down, McCain or Proctor last season would have a game where they'd hit 3, 4, 5 3-pointers one game and then struggle in the next one. Sounds like Kon Knueppel is just going to always be raining down 3-pointers, which I will take. But they talked about his consistency. And the other thing that I thought was interesting talking about Kon Knueppel was, he said that Kon gets into the paint really well. He's way more athletic than people expected. Those are, the fact that this guy is not just an outside shooter, not just a dude who's going to rain down on you from 3, shows you how dangerous he's going to be. And the fact that they're talking about his athleticism means he may be a better defender than people expected. And then I was very intrigued at the fact that Caleb and Cooper were both talking about how versatile the team is, and that they have a lot of guys, and guys need to accept their roles. I have a feeling that this is a mantra. This is something that the seniors, the super seniors, the experienced players in this team, Tyrese Proctor, Sion James, Mason Gillis, that they are preaching to everyone. Literally, Cooper Flagg said, not everyone is going to get what they want. But if you buy into the team concept and play for each other, this team can reach great, great heights. And we have all spent all summer trying to figure out, now that all K2 is blowing up, who are the starters and who's going to play and all those other kind of stuff. Is Shire going to play 11 guys, blah, blah, blah. What these guys are telling us in these interviews is that they are all being told, don't think about your playing time. Think about your role. Think about how what you do can support the other guys around you. And that is how you will all succeed, and you will all reach the goal, and the goal being wearing a ring on your finger at the end of the season.
I think that was very, very telling as well, because as we know, that role could change from game to game, right? Like if you think about a baseball team, back in the day, they used to have your game 1 starter, right? You put the ball in the hands of your best pitcher, your ace. But game 7, you might go to a veteran, right? The big game, that closeout game, like, hey, I'm not going to put the ball in the young ace or the hot rookie. I'm going to give it to my 17-year guy who can throw the palm ball, right? Like that was a thing back in the day, and still kind of is, where you kind of say, I'm going to go with this guy because I want experience on the field. We have a lot of experience. We have a lot of young guys, and we have, that balance. And so especially early, that balance could change, right? When we were playing the Kentuckys and the Arizonas of the world versus, playing, the Elons and the, those type of teams, right? The smaller teams. So it'll be interesting how we do that. A couple of things, Jason, that I thought were pretty fun. The first thing is he really likes golf. He's been playing a lot of it, and they said that he had played with John Shire, and he'd gotten out of the course with him. And I guess, lost, so he wants to go back out and play again. He also mentioned that if there was a NIL deal that he would really be interested in, it would be a golf deal so that he could play more golf and get better at that. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then obviously there was a couple of, fun questions. There was two of them I thought were cool. He does all-time Duke starting five and his all-time NBA starting five. So his all-time Duke starting five would be Kyrie, JJ Redick, Jayson Tatum, Zion, and Christian Laettner, which I thought was pretty interesting. Also, his NBA team: Magic, Jordan, Bird, LeBron, and Kareem. And
some
Caleb
old school
Foster
in there.
Yeah, so Caleb Foster was like, "Wait, no Shaq," and he was like, "No, Kareem." Like he didn't hesitate. So I thought those were pretty interesting. Obviously that wouldn't be my five, but I thought that was a pretty interesting answer for a guy who clearly has studied the game, because, as you mentioned, there's a lot of guys back there who he was not alive to see play live. There are some older guys on this list, and it's good to see some older guys on that list.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, I noted how often the name Jayson Tatum came up.
Oh yeah,
guys,
he's his favorite player. Yeah,
favorite player, and like Cooper was recalling the first time he became a Duke fan, the first time he saw Duke and really became aware of Duke, and sort of was like, I want to play there. He said it was watching Jayson Tatum, Luke Kennard, Grayson Allen. That was when he became a big Duke fan. Jayson Tatum is paying dividends for Duke basketball well beyond the 1 year that he appeared in a Duke uniform. And then the last thing I wanted to mention very quickly was this. So Caleb Foster and Cooper Flagg talked about being recruited, not just by Duke, but by other schools. And they both had identical stories to tell about the negative recruiting. Everywhere you would go, they would say, "Oh, look, we have this thing. Duke doesn't have this." Or, "Oh, look what we can do for you here. I bet you Duke can't do that for you." And Caleb Foster just went ahead and said it. He was like, everybody kept on talking about Duke. Everybody kept on saying, "Duke this, Duke that. We're better than Duke. We're better than Duke." Caleb's like, I realized Duke was the place to go.
Duke was the standard. Yeah.
That's if everyone's going to compare themselves to you, right? If everyone's going to say, "Oh, look at this is how we're better than Duke," then you're going to kind of go, maybe Duke's better than all of you. And apparently that played a role in both of their recruiting. I think it's very interesting to hear about that. And I've heard anecdotally that a number of blue blood schools, UConn, are very aggressive about insisting that they are better than Duke and that you should pick them over Duke, that they specifically recruit against Duke because they know that if they're in a battle for a top player, Duke is always the biggest threat.
I will say, just to that last point, two things. One, I'm still not calling a UConn a blue blood yet. You can say I'm wrong, but I'm not going to do it because that's just not who I am. And the second thing is, if they were so convinced that they were better than Duke, maybe they shouldn't have brought Cooper Flagg to UConn when UConn played Duke in football and watched Duke absolutely mollywop them 41-7. I would pick a different date. That's what I would do. I would pick, oh wait, we're playing Duke in football. Let's pick another weekend when we're playing the Citadel. Let's do that. We beat the Citadel too. Duke can't do that because they don't play it, right? But don't do it when you're going head to head with the school and then watch the football team beat them. And he goes, "Y'all supposed to be better than them in everything, but y'all brought me up here for this." And then he goes down the camera and it's just this glitz and glam of like, we're not even telling him we're the best. We're just showing what we are. And he's like, yeah, because he mentioned that as soon as he got back from his visit, he said that he was ready to commit, but he wanted to take a couple days just to make sure. And then he said a couple days later, he was like, "Yep, that's about right." And then you get the iconic moment of me shrieking on this podcast mid-sentence when he just dropped like at 8 a.m, like, "Oh, hey, I'm going to Duke." Like, congratulations, everybody. Hey, thanks everybody for putting our name in your mouth, because apparently that helps us get great recruits.
Exactly. So super fast. Last thing I wanted to mention about Cooper Flagg. I was really impressed at one point when he was asked about what he's working on this summer. And usually when you ask a guy that, they're like, "Oh, I'm working on my dribble, working on my shooting, working on my defense." Coop gave specifics. You can tell that this guy is an analytical player. This guy is someone who really digs down into what it takes to get better at your game. He was like, "I'm working on being lower in my stance, trying to be a little quicker laterally. I'm working on my hip mobility. I'm doing some yoga." Like, I was like, "Damn, Coop." I mean, that,
and
my kid getting some instruction.
And he mentioned one thing that I haven't heard a lot of guys say. He said, "I'm working on becoming a better person and by de facto a better teammate." Right? Like he's working. Like he's like, I want to go to Duke so I can become a better person. And I think that's going to help him in his game. That again, that mentality, just staying focused and being present in the moment and learning about yourself. That's what makes him top tier, right? That's what makes him a player that people who hate Duke are saying, man, I cannot wait low key to watch you guys play because he's the real deal. And he's only going to get better from here, ladies and gentlemen.
So, Donald, when we came on this podcast, we thought it was going to be a DBR Bites. It's going to be nice and short. DBR Bites episode.
I just had
56.
dinner, so it was a great bite. It was great hors d'oeuvres.
It was an all-you-can-eat bite, baby. It was a full meal. That's it for the latest episode. Thanks for bearing with us. We'll be back in your feed in just a couple of days. We were talking moments ago about all that negative recruiting that happens around Duke. Well, our next episode, unless something crazy happens, is going to be a conversation with one of the leading recruiting guys out there. I know there's been a lot of concern, a lot of talk about what Duke is doing on the recruiting trail. You're going to get it from someone who knows what's going on when we're back here on the DBR podcast next. Until then, he is Donald, I am Jayson, and this is the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.